The December 14, 2017 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Before us, we have the council meeting minutes from November 6 and November 9, 2017. Are there any additions, corrections?
Move we approve. Second.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
We have one matter of special privilege today. With us, we have Mr. Frank Rahubka, the National Softball Association, to present the Kiwanis Park 2017 Outstanding Park Award. Sir, if you could come forward, please.
Mr. Mayor, if I could ask you to step down, and Robbie and Tyler. I represent the National Softball Association. I know that there's several in the room here that have seen my face around. But just to give you a little background and to show how the city of Williamsburg has embraced sports over the years. About 18 years ago, when I had my first tournament, I had 12 teams that were going to come and play a quarter path. I said, I am not wasting a weekend on 12 teams. And my boss said, you will have that tournament. Well, I did. Well, to tell you right now, as 18 years have gone by, there has been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7,000 players who have come through this city to play ball, and hopefully more. I would also like to take this moment to let you know that we're in the works of finalizing details to bring the Class B World Series back to Williamsburg for 2018 in July. And we appreciate the hospitality and the gracious hosts that you've been over the years. At the National Convention every year, we recognize certain parks throughout the country that have gone above and beyond to support us, to work with us, because it is a team effort, both with the municipalities, the parks, and NSA. And without saying, Williamsburg is always at the top. And so it's my privilege to present this to you from the national office in Kentucky, National Softball Association 2017 Outstanding Park for Kiwanis Park in Williamsburg, Virginia. Like any good infomercial, wait, there's more. Mr. Collins, would you please come down here?
Player of the year?
Actually, I really appreciate everything, and I want to let you know that I wouldn't even venture to begin to think how many parks and recs departments there are throughout the United States, throughout the 50 states, probably an infinite number. But it's my honor right now to let you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Collins, Robbie, and the City Council, and everybody here, that the City of Williamsburg Parks and Recreation is now the 13th Parks and Rec Department in the United States that will be inducted into the National Softball Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Next year.
Cool.
Okay?
That's great.
So there's only one part of the deal. Last week of October, a few of you need to fly down to Florida to accept the award. I know that won't break anybody's heart that time of year. More to follow, but again, congratulations to everybody, all right? Mr. Mayor.
Also keep it.
Well, sir, on behalf of my colleagues on City Council and all the residents of Williamsburg, we thank you very much for this recognition, which we greatly appreciate. And Robbie, to you and your team, thanks for making it all possible. This takes us to public hearings, of which we have none today. So, moving right along, we'll go to reports. Monthly financial statement, Mr. Collins.
Mayor Freiling, members of the council, I'll be very brief. Talk a little bit about the financial report. This will be the last month that you'll get the report where it's apples and oranges, comparing this year with last year. So the adjusting entries from the audit will be made in December. So the report that you get this time next month will be comparable. So you'll be able to see what's going on. So don't think there's any surprises at all going on. We'll mention the room and meal taxes, especially the meal taxes were down about 4.6% compared to last year. And, you know, Mr. Collins and I talk about this every month. And you have to look at all the months combined and just look at the average. There's a lot of different reasons why they could be. We looked at, sometimes there's more weekend days in this month compared to last month, at the same time a year ago for the same time period. So there's a lot of things going on, weather, events, things like that. So looking at the overall, we're down about 2.7% on the meal taxes for the year. Room taxes are down 1.3%. And that's really all I wanted to point out today, and look forward to getting you the, Vicki will be getting you that report next month to be comparable, apples to apples.
And before Phil gets away on the financial report, Phil asked us intentionally not to draw too much attention to his retirement or to do anything special. Typically there would be a resolution. I'm not ambushing him with anything. I'm respecting his request. He's earned that respect. But I do want to draw attention that this is Phil's last council meeting. When you spend more than 30 years doing anything in your life and do it exceptionally well like Phil Serra has, you deserve some respect and attention. And I just wanted to point out and say thank you for your time with the city.
Thank you all. It's been a good run.
And Mr. Serra, I've only had the privilege of working with you for about 14 years on council, but I will say that in my time here, I think it's fair to suggest that everybody I've served with on council throughout that time period has had the greatest respect for your work, and we greatly appreciate all that you do and have done for this community. It's made a tremendous difference over a long period of time and kept Williamsburg in a position of strength that's allowed us to do many other wonderful things. So on behalf of all of them, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Like I've told everybody, I've just been lucky enough to be a member of a really good team for a very long time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
Okay, this takes us to the city manager reports, of which we have 6. And if past practice is any indicator, I'm guessing you're going to turn each of these over to somebody. Mr. Collins?
Tyler?
Good afternoon, Mayor Freiling and members of City Council. The Parks and Recreation Department played their first league game on Field 1 in 1971. Field 2 came online in 1977 and was rebuilt in 2004 due to Hurricane Isabel, and Field 3 was built in 1988. These fields have served the community well for many years. However, in order to continue to provide quality fields for our recreational leagues and to maintain a competitive edge for sports tourism, the fields must be renovated. Renovating the softball fields at Quarterpath Park is included in the city's FY18 capital improvement plan using FY17 funding. The project was deferred due to hosting the National Softball Association Class A World Series in July 2017. The scope of work for this project includes rebuilding the infields, tilling and laser grading the outfields, and adding irrigation to each field. The project was advertised as a request for proposal on August 19, 2017. 2 proposals were received. After interviewing both prospects and completing a thorough review of references, staff recommends that City Council authorize the city manager to execute a contract in the amount of $214,200 with Earthworks and Sprinklers Unlimited Incorporated for softball field renovations at Quarterpath. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Matt Harder from Earthworks is also here to assist with any technical questions.
No questions. Sounds good to me.
My only question is, when do you anticipate the work to be done, particularly?
Right. A lot of it is weather
announcement.
dependent, especially this time of year, but we're hoping to have the project done late March, early April.
Okay.
The project will include Bermuda grass, which will be done late June, early July, depending on the weather.
Because with the announcement of the
Sure.
football coming
Yes,
back.
we plan to be ready for the 2018 World Series.
Okay, thank you.
And this is for each of the 3 fields?
Correct, yes, at quarter.
Currently, there's not sprinklers there?
Correct, no irrigation, which is unlike most of our competitors around the area, York County and the city of Newport News. So that will be an added bonus.
So this will make a measurable difference
Sure,
to
absolutely.
the quality of the playing surface?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you for your presentation, Tyler.
You're welcome.
I'd just like to add that from my dark recollections of days past on the softball fields, particularly the outfield and field 1 had some rough terrain.
Sure.
So that laser leveling should
Yes.
make a huge improvement along with the irrigation system.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. Do I have a motion?
Move the City Council authorize the city manager to execute a contract in the amount of $214,000 with Earthworks Sprinklers Unlimited for a softball field renovation at Quarter Path Park.
Second.
Okay.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zane?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Takes us to our second city manager report, location of monument sign in public right-of-way, shops at 2nd Street, 311 2nd Street. Ms. Burke?
Good afternoon, Mayor Fryling and members of council. The ownership of the shops at 2nd Street has changed from Carlton Holdings LLC to 2nd Street Shops LLC, which requires City Council to approve an existing monument sign to remain in the right-of-way at 2nd Street. The monument sign was approved by City Council originally on May 8th, 2014, and a condition of that approval was granted that it be for the current applicant only. As a result of that condition, the new owner has applied for approval to allow the existing monument sign to remain in the right-of-way at 2nd Street. The existing sign is an externally illuminated dark green background with white lettering on a brick base, and was originally approved by the Architectural Review Board on April 22nd, 2014. No alterations are currently proposed at this time. Staff has outlined 5 conditions in a memo, and staff recommends approval. I'm available if you have any questions. Happy to answer them for you.
Questions? Just a comment that this has been a great addition to our commercial real estate. Tenants in this center are awesome. I frequent it, so happy to approve.
Same for me. I was just going to echo what Scott said as far as a resurgence of economic activity in that area, and it seems pretty straightforward and compliant, so by me.
Thank you. The sign being in a right-of-way generally is something that obviously we go through this process for a reason. Is there any reason to believe that leaving it there causes visual impairment to traffic or anything of that nature?
The planning department hasn't received any complaints. I'm not sure. I don't believe Public Works has any problems with it either.
I would imagine it probably would have been in the report. But so, with that, I think there's no sense in hampering the new owner, his ability to promote those businesses there with the sign.
Ready to vote, Mr. Mayor.
You know, my recollection of when we started this practice a number of years ago, quite a number of years ago, was at the request of 2nd Street Restaurant and Bistro because of the extraordinarily wide right-of-way on 2nd Street. And if the property owner can only put the sign on their property, the visibility is significantly limited. So this seems like, particularly since we've already approved it once, this sounds like something we should definitely do again.
I move that City Council approve the location of the proposed sign on the city right-of-way subject to the 5 conditions recommended by staff.
Second.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zane?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
This takes us to our next city manager report, appointment to Virginia First Cities Resolution 17-24.
As the city is joining Virginia First Cities effective January 1st, their bylaws provide for a member of City Council to join the city manager on their board membership. Council has identified Councilman Zhang as that appointee with Councilwoman Ramsey as the alternate, and the resolution before you provides for that appointment.
Questions, comments?
How about a motion?
How about it?
Move that City Council approve proposed resolution 17-24, a resolution appointing councilperson Benny Zhang, and Councilperson Barbara Ramsey as an alternate to represent the City Council with the City Manager in the Virginia First Cities Organization.
Second.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang and Ms. Ramsey, thank you very much for your willingness to serve in this capacity. This takes us to the next presentation, which is presentations by the Chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. That would be me. And Audit Manager Ann Wall and Finance Director Phil Serra. Each year, the City's Finance and Audit Committee meets to discuss the audit report, and that meeting was held on December 4th. The committee consists of myself as the mayor and local, not necessarily all residents of Williamsburg, but Gwen Williams and Bob Taylor. The Finance and Audit Committee meets with the auditors and staff to discuss the audit engagement, internal controls, and to hear a briefing on the financial report and results of operations for the year completed. And another important part of the meeting is to discuss concerns that the independent auditors may have regarding internal controls, staff training, and or anything based upon the review of the financial systems and procedures in place during the year. The committee heard a presentation from Ann Wall, manager with Robinson, Farmer and Cox Associates, which focused on the audit engagement, internal controls, and accounting standards. Finance Director Phil Serra gave a presentation on the operating results and financial position at the end of the year. The Finance and Audit Committee members approved a motion to recommend acceptance of the report as presented and forward to City Council for our December 14th meeting, which is today. Draft minutes of the meeting have been distributed to City Council members. Ann Wall, the Audit Manager with Robinson, Farmer and Cox Associates, is here with us today, and she will speak briefly about the audit engagement, and she will be followed by Finance Director Phil Serra, who will brief Council on the results of operations from fiscal year 17. Ms. Wall?
Good afternoon. Local governments are required to have an annual audit, an independent annual audit conducted each year. You engaged Robinson Farmer Cox Associates to perform this financial statement audit and compliance report for the city for the year ended June 30th, 2017. Local government audits are subject to much regulation. Your audit was subject to the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America, the audit specifications for counties, cities, and towns that's issued by the Auditor of Public Accounts, the standards for financial audits contained in governmental auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General, and the single audit amendments of 1996 and the uniform guidance published by the Office of Management and Budget that governs your federal program dollars. I'm pleased to report to you that the city received an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statement presentation. That's the highest level of the clean opinion that any locality can receive. That means that your financial statements included in your CAFR are materially correct and presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And this opinion was based on the substantive work that we did during the audit field. The other two reports that we issued, they're in the back of the report in the compliance section, and they were also clean or unmodified opinions relative to the compliance work that we did over federal program dollars and our review of internal controls that's required under governmental auditing standards. We did not issue a separate management letter. The final audited report was submitted to the Auditor of Public Accounts along with the transmittal forms and an agreed upon procedures opinion by the November 30th deadline. It's a statutory deadline. The submission is online. New this year, there was a requirement, there was a change to the code by the 2017 General Assembly session that will require localities to submit a notarized statement from the chief elected official and chief administrative officer of the locality certifying that the results of the audit have been presented in a public session. So that'll be submitted after today's meeting. This report has also been submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. That's also an online submission, and that's required because of the federal program dollars that the city receives. I'd like to report to you that the cooperation that we received from the various departments of the city was very professional, and everyone was receptive to our inquiries and requests for information. Just really good communication is a really good start, and we have that here in the city. The field work was performed in June. We were here doing a lot of our internal control work in June, and then came back for a week in September and did the final field work. We did propose a few adjusting entries, and those have been posted to the city's accounting system. But they were not that many, and that really speaks well to the interim financial reports that the city reviews during the year. This year that we're in now, the city's transitioning to the new accounting system, the Tyler Munis system. So next year really will be the first year auditing against the new system. This year, we really just received some financial reports from the new system. I think all the year-end data had been input into that. But all the details were in the old system this year. The city will also again submit its report to the Government Finance Officers Association in order to apply for the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. And we certainly believe that this report will meet the certificate program's requirements. The Finance Department assisted greatly in the preparation of this document. Really, the only pieces of this report that belong to the auditors are our opinions. There's 3 opinions in there. The rest of the information belongs to the city, but city staff, the finance director drafted the management's discussion and analysis, which really provides an overview of the financial information, the financial statements, detailed comparisons. He prepared the transmittal letter that's at the front of the document, which is really kind of like a cover letter or introduction to the CAFR, and the statistical tables that are located in the back. In addition, city staff performed a detailed review of the CAFR. We did not encounter any difficulties in dealing with management and performing our audit, and didn't have any disagreements over any accounting issues. On a final note, we reviewed the audit and the financial statements in greater detail with the Finance Committee earlier, and we did discuss the retirement of the finance director and then the plans that the city has in place to fill his role on an interim and on a permanent basis. So, on a personal note, I'd like to acknowledge that it's been a pleasure to work with Phil, and really want to recognize his professionalism and expertise and attention to detail over the years as part of the audit. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Sarah?
I'm going to attempt to do this without notes. We're going to look at the operations for the year that just ended, June 30th, and look at the results of operations for the general fund, talk about the operating surplus, talk about those components, and even more important, financial position at year-end, give you a lot of information about the fund balance and the working capital for the utility fund. Show you some graphs as you've seen before, revenues and expenditures compared to budget, show you how the operating surplus came about, and especially in relation to the reserve policy. Give you more information about where we are with funding the pension plan. I'm going to make this as brief as I can. Any really detailed information is really included in the management's discussion and analysis section of the reports, multi-page document section of the report that's really got a lot of good information, a lot of trend information about every specific revenue and expenditure of all the funds of the city. So we'll talk about the general fund right now, and this includes the sales tax fund. Revenues for the year were $42 million, about 1% higher than last year. And you can see that general property taxes and other local taxes are about 76% of the total receipts, and those were up just a little bit there. On the expenditure side, including capital projects, spending was $42.8 million, and that was down about 1.8% compared to last year. And that's really because there was a reduced amount of capital spending this year. Looking at the operating revenues being over budget, every category almost was over budget. Property taxes, business personal property taxes were a little bit over budget, along with real estate taxes. That made the majority of that $177,000. Of the local taxes, business license came in strong for the year, and meal taxes were a little bit over budget too. Permits, all of the major categories of the permits were over budget. It's a good sign for the economy, and things were really happening last year pretty well. Parking fines were down, and we're addressing that now with parking enforcement, beefing that up now with the police department. Use of money and property, there was some sale of some surplus property throughout the year. Parking garage receipts were up significantly over budget for the year. And then room rentals for the Stryker Center and community building were over budget. Charges for service, a few of the recreation fees, program fee revenues were over budget, along with grave openings. And then miscellaneous, most of this increase over budget was related to the EMS recovery fees. Then intergovernmental was down a little bit compared to the initial estimates given to us by the Department of Education. On the expenditure side, all expenditures were under budget except for the health piece. Schools were under budget because of the surplus coming back to the city that they had a school operating surplus for FY17 that was returned. Big savings really is in the city departments, $862,000, so that's the majority of the expenditures being under budget for the year, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The operations were most of the line items aside from the other categories of salaries, wages, benefits, and capital outlay. But the operational line items, most of the savings were in recreation, fire, IT, and planning. And then wages, salaries, and benefits is the majority of the savings. This is obviously from attrition, and those savings were most prevalent in the fire department, planning, rec, and police. Capital outlay, a little bit under budget on various machinery and equipment line items citywide. And then looking at the revenues over budget of $674,000 and the expenditures under budget, $1.17 million. Total operating surplus was a bit over $1.8 million for the year. And that relates to about 5.1% of the operating revenues for FY 2017. And you've seen this graph, the green line's revenues, red line's expenditures, and this goes back to 2003. This really, the gap between the two lines obviously is a surplus each year, and you can see especially since fiscal year 2009, most of the surpluses have been generated by expenditure savings, and that's no different this year at the very end there. That's the 2017 year end, that's the $1.8 million surplus. And this graphically just shows expense and revenue of the governmental funds, which includes the general fund operations, the sales tax fund, and the public assistance fund. But this graphically shows how we've gone 34 years ago, around the $10 million budget up to where we are now, a total of $40 to $45 million. But you can just see the red line is really the expenditures. There's some years we have more spending than others, obviously, and that's driven by the capital plan each year. And then that impacts, obviously, the fund balance. So it's directly correlated to spending, the fund balance trend lines. And then fund balance, beginning of the year, we started out with $33.1 million. We added the revenues of $42 million. A little bit more in expenditures were taken away, and then we transferred about $1 million to the public assistance fund. The year-ending fund balance was $31.3 million. And that's broken into these categories. Non-spendable is a little bit of prepaids, but it's essentially the market value of the 5 motel properties that the city's purchased over the last several years for economic development purposes. And then the rest of it, we actually put 35% of revenues into the unassigned category, and then the residual is pushed over into the assigned category. So that's where we are with all the categories. And of the assigned, $10.4 million are carryover projects. You'll actually see that on your financial reports. That's added as a budget amendment from the carryover funds from the prior year. And most of the money was tied up in an FDIC insured account. Some of the money at the end of the year was in checking accounts, but the cash equivalents were almost $22 million at the end of the year. About $4.7 million was also in the state local government investment pool. Total of a little over about $26.5 million in investments for the year. The state pool averaged 0.75% for the fiscal year, and the average yield on the city's overall portfolio for the year was about 0.2%. In the utility fund, had an operating income of just over $1 million, had some interest income and connection fees, and then we had interest costs taken away for debt service. We ended up with an increase in the net position of about $1 million for the year. And that relates over here to cash and investments, $5.8 million at year end, along with accounts receivable. These are unbilled water bills, about $1.1 million for total current assets of almost $7 million, compared to current liabilities of $1.5 million. That put the working capital to $5.4 million at the end of the year. And the last slide, I'll try to explain this as simply as I can. This is relating to the total net pension liability. This is the present value of what the liability of the pension plan, all the employees' plans till they retire, really. So, but the first column is the liability itself. That's the present value of what it takes to fund the promise to give city employees pensions for the rest of their life, essentially. It's a VRS, all three different plans that we have with the VRS. The middle column are the assets that are designated as city assets that support that liability. So if you have a liability starting at the beginning of the year of $65.6 million and assets of $53.7 million, we had a net pension liability starting out at $11.8 million. We added in the service cost, and that's what it takes to fund another year of actuarially what it takes to fund the promise to pay benefits for all the existing employees again for one more year. And take away the benefit payments, those are what's actually paid. So the liability was $67.3 million at the end of the year. And then we compared that with assets at the end of the year at $53.4 million. So the bottom line is the net pension liability is $13.9 million. So that's up about $2 million from the prior year. And that's split between the general fund and the utility fund. But if you compare the assets with the liability, we're about 79.4% ratio there. And that's down a little bit from last year. We were almost at 82% last year. So that kind of, in a nutshell, explains where we are with the pension obligation. And that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions for Mr. Sarah or Ms. Wall?
Sure. Compared to other localities similarly situated, how does 79% look?
It's a little bit lower than some of the surrounding localities from what I've seen. And that deals with our demographics is a little different. But probably we have very small employee relative size with very good pension benefits.
Thank you.
We also have the 185, the hazardous duty supplement for the public safety.
Council will also recall that they asked staff last year to look into the pros and cons of buying some of that percentage, and it was not cost effective for spending versus the ability to maintain the reserve balance and achieve capital outcomes and have growth in the economy. So that was a calculated decision, and we'll keep monitoring that year to year, see if there's an opportunity to improve that. It varies over investment performance over time as well. And with the hybrid VRS system and more employees being in that system versus the old system, you'll also see a change in that percentage moving forward.
I will also note on this slide, this is the pension obligation as of June 2016. So this is before the stock market really had its highs. The highs started about in the fall of 2016 to where they are now. So I imagine this time next year when you're looking at these numbers, they will be quite a bit higher because that will be, the middle column will be comparing assets as of June 30th, 2017.
I'm glad you pointed that out because I was expecting that with the market being what it is today, it should be better. So I don't have any questions, but I think just a compliment to you and the staff to help make sure that we stay on track. And I know that through our budgeting process, we try to make sure that we never spend more than we take in, and that's been a kind of a policy, pay as we go, and it bodes well when you look at reports like this. So thank you.
Ms. Rames, did you?
No questions, just thank you
she passed.
for the
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Dan, for working with the city, and I'm glad to hear that we're working well with our partners there. It was quite interesting just to start off with this. After my last law school final yesterday of the semester, just a bunch of us got together, and some of them were going to bars, some of them were going to go to a restaurant and eat out, and I went back to my room and read the CAFR report. So, Scott, you could recall that, right? No, but I say this every year, and I say it because it's very important. And I am very appreciative of your leadership and your team, because this is probably one of the most important things that we do in the city, besides giving out our quality service and all of that to our residents. And the fact that we do it on time and we get awarded and recognized for that, I think that speaks volumes to the city and to staff in preparing this and the presentation that you've given us today. Not every locality has from what I know, has the privilege of having their CAFR report put in time and dissected and put in a very readable format. That's the one part I was able to get away from reading this 200-page documents. That was very readable, and I appreciate that very much.
Mr. Serra, through the course of your presentation, you talked about the city's revenues and expenses in two different, well, more than two, but at least two different ways. One was just the operating revenues and expenses, and then the other was the total revenues and expenses. And when we're talking just about the operating budget, we're not talking about any of the capital expenses. So when we talk about operating budget, the city came out about $1.8 million on the positive side. When we layer on the capital expenses, then those vary significantly year by year by the size of the projects that we have going on.
Yes, sir.
And that's what drove the overall expenses $800,000 above all of the revenues. So from an operating standpoint, all of the city department heads did a terrific job in controlling expenses, keeping those in line and helping to generate the majority of that savings, which then gets turned back into the capital fund and pays for all these other projects that we need to do. Is that a fair assessment?
I couldn't have explained it better.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the last slide? Our contributions to the pension plan, are they determined by the state or the Virginia retirement system every 2 years?
They're the VRS actuary. It's a private consulting firm that does it for VRS every 2 years.
So we're following their guidelines every year on how much money we should be putting into our pension plan.
Absolutely, yes.
And even with that, there's still that unfunded liability. Okay, but it's not a matter of any policy decision on the city's part, except that, as Mr. Collins said, we could try to buy more of that, but we decided that was not a good fiscal.
They're using a discount rate of 7%. So if the investments make 7%, they're right on target. But that's been iffy over the last few years. So
7% seems a little bit aggressive.
I
don't know.
To me, it does too. I mean, if you're looking at a long-term portfolio that's loaded with a lot of bonds, things like that, so they're looking at a long-term return. So things that they've purchased years and years ago that are still out there. So it's a combination of old investments, new investments, and a lot of diverse investments.
And going back to the liability issue on the pension plan, thinking that there are employees in this system who are currently, whose the liability is reflected in here, will not be retiring for many, many, many years. This is not, I mean, it's something we should be constantly paying attention to, but not something of immediate concern.
No, the main thing is that you fund every year according to what the VRS actuary tells us to. And most localities in Virginia do. The state and schools have not over the years, and that's what they're trying to address that now with kind of catching up to where they need to be. But the cities, we especially, have been right on point with funding exactly what the actuary has recommended every year.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Serra. Can I have a motion to accept the city's comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2017?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Ramsey?
Aye.
This takes us to our next city manager report. PPTA proposal for Monticello Avenue improvements. Mr. Collins, Mr. Clayton.
Thank you. The city received an unsolicited design bid proposal for the Monticello Avenue Improvements Project under the Public-Private Transportation Act, or PPTA. The submission is also subject to the city's PPTA guidelines that were adopted in 2016. The unsolicited proposal was received from Henderson Incorporated, AES Consulting Engineers, Branscombe Incorporated, and Utility Services for the completion of transportation project. What's being proposed under here generally and was available in the packet provides for that section of improvement of Monticello Avenue from approximately Trayburn Drive on Monticello to Richmond Road, and then around the corner on Richmond Road to Monticello to just before Matoka Court. Some of the improvements included parallel parking aisles on both sides of the right-of-way along Monticello, landscaping and amenity items located along green space and along the backs of the sidewalks, wide sidewalk areas, a separated bike lane, portion along Monticello, and multi-use path from Trayburn to the Williamsburg Shopping Center area and along the Richmond Road corridor. Pedestrian and bicycle safety features along the corridor, right-of-way widening, resurfacing, restriping, and signalization of 2 intersections. In addition, there were amenities for lighting, landscaping, stormwater, and utilities also considered. And it's being submitted in coordination with the adjoining redevelopment of Williamsburg Shopping Center and Monticello Shopping Centers. The PPTA process grants the city the authority to allow private entities to develop qualifying projects such as this under state act authority. It still provides for a competitive bid process. What council's being asked today is whether or not to start a PPTA process to solicit bids. Council retains the ability to stop the process at any time. If council says yes, please proceed with the process, then the city will post according to state law on the state procurement website and the city's website for 120 days, as well as put into a newspaper of local circulation the request for proposals through the PPTA process, and have 120 days to have competing bids submitted. At the end of the 120 days, a staff review committee reviews the proposals received and provides recommendations to accept none, one, or some combination of proposals received to move forward. Council makes the decision at that point. At that point, staff would begin negotiating and reviewing those agreements further to determine if one or more should be moved forward for the actual selection of completing the project. At the end of the process, one firm is selected or not to do the work, and the final comprehensive agreement, which has the actual scope of work and the cost and everything, is negotiated with that one company. This process is typically used for 2 reasons. One is when there are price and cost considerations or creative funding opportunities. There's nothing with that in this process. The other is timing. And timing's the big reason that the staff committee recommended to proceed with the PPTA. There's a need to complete the public project in coordination with the private redevelopment investments. We do not want a redevelopment project impacting our investment coming in later, and they would not want us to tear up the road in front of newly opened businesses and disrupt that part of the economy. So the projects need to happen in coordination. This process allows for that to happen. The review committee set by the city's guideline in the PPTA Act is the city manager, the public works director, the finance director, the planning director, and the city attorney. That committee met reviewed the process and recommend that council move forward.
Questions, comments?
No questions. And this second time in recent history that this process has kicked off important city projects, so I'm comfortable moving forward.
And I think that the way it's been presented, it answers questions that people might have, particularly addressing the reasons and benefits for doing something like this. So thank you for clarifying all of that.
Marvin, so as you go out to, assuming we agree to proceed with the PPTA, we're going to communicate to the public that this project is open for bids. Is there enough information out there that any other companies that wanted to bid on this have that opportunity to find that information? Or is that part of it?
So the city's consultant, Kimley Horn, did a traffic analysis and initial design charrette. That, in effect, gets close to about a 30% design. That's sufficient to submit. That's the materials that this group of companies use to submit. All of the materials publicly available to this company, as well as the non-bid amount, the publicly disclosable section of this, it will be made available for everybody to review and submit competitive bids. However, competitive bids can differ from the original submission as well. There can be differences there, but that would be the guideline. Would be that the city's about approximately 30% design prepared by Kimley Horn.
Right. I just want to make sure that there's equal access to all the information to anybody else that would want to participate in this process. So given that, I think as the city manager says, given the timing, it makes sense that we begin this process.
Yeah, right.
We as a body have to decide who's going to do that work at some point, and I think it behooves all of us to do it as he described with Broad Street doing what they're doing, kind of get it all done at once. And so now is the time to start a process, and I'm comfortable with this process.
Yeah, and I agree. I have no further questions. Thank you, Martin, with that. But based on what you said, it was persuasive. It seems the pros are really there, particularly, as you were saying, the controlling aspect of timing. So I'm happy to support and move forward with this too.
As Mr. Foster alluded to, it was a few years ago, several years ago, that we began the PPTA process that resulted in the construction of the Stryker Center.
PPAE or something?
PPE.
Yeah, PPA, sorry. And that work served the community very well. But as Mr. Collins referenced, there can be differences in the proposals that are submitted, and I think the Stryker is a great example of how differing some of those proposals were. It's a different concept because you're dealing with architecture, but they came out with some really diverse project offerings. The one thing I want to clarify, and I know you've said this, but I just want to make sure everybody has a good grasp of it. All we would be voting on here is the beginning of a process. We are not accepting this bid. We are not designating anybody as the contractor. We're opening up the process for other people to submit bids that can be compared against the one that we received as an unsolicited bid.
Correct. All council would be doing is deciding to use the PPTA process as a procurement process, as opposed to going out to bid for a design, getting that design back, putting that design out for bids for construction, depending on how that breaks out, getting those bids. So it's just putting it into one process that's allowed for under law to meet a timing coordination with neighboring development.
Well, and let me clarify one thing. These are really proposals and not really bids per se.
Yeah.
You're selecting, at the end of the day, you're selecting a contractor or a team of contractors to move forward with and negotiate ultimately what the contract price is.
Other comments?
Move the City Council accept the unsolicited PPTA proposal and direct the City Manager to begin the process as set forth in the PPTA guidelines for design-build projects for the Monticello Avenue Improvements Project.
Seconded.
Ms. Scott?
Mr. Zane.
Aye.
Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
This takes us to our last city manager report presentation by the Seawall Coalition. Mr. Collins, you want to make an introduction?
I'd just like to invite Paul Olson and Susan Gaston to the podium to do their presentation. I do know that they've presented to the mayor, they presented to a group of staff, and following those presentations, felt it appropriate to allow a presentation before council as a whole. They were also presented to the Regional Chief Administrative Officers Group last week. There's a couple outstanding questions that they may want to address from that I provided to council today when I received them from Bob Crum, the director there. Welcome to the City Council and look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mayor Freiling, Vice Mayor Foster, members of council, Madam City Attorney. I'm Susan Gaston, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Paul Olson. Our goal is to give you a bit of context and framework, and then give you a sense of really what we are talking about today on behalf of our client, the Seawall Coalition, and to make an ask that you all be part of our organization and help to move forward both federal funding opportunities and policy. But to give you a bit of a framework and background, I think many of you know that I live here. I live in James City County with my family. I own and operate a very small boutique legislative consulting firm and represent a variety of clients ranging from real estate, land use and housing, to commercial fishing, aquaculture, and electrical generation, renewable energy, motorcycles, and a variety of others. Needless to say, I have a lot of fun. And I've been before you previously, and it's good to be back, and we do appreciate the opportunity to give you some additional details. As I mentioned, I am joined today by my colleague, Colonel Paul Olson. He is a 30-year Army veteran and recently retired, so I still call him Colonel. He has certainly earned that after his years of service, and he is a dedicated soldier at his core. His most recent post, and this may be a familiar name and face, was the commander of the Norfolk District Office of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And he and I have worked together on a number of issues and projects. We did not always see eye to eye, but through all of that, we became very close friends, and we're colleagues. And in this effort moving forward on the Seawall Coalition, Paul has been named as the national director, and he brought me in to essentially be the Virginia boots on the ground and to do with you all today what I think the Gaston Group does best, which is to open doors, elicit support, and policy assistance as we move down a path. Paul currently is also a senior university official with Old Dominion University. He is well respected by legislators, particularly those who serve on the Virginia Recurrent Flooding Commission, which meets monthly, and he and I spend quite a bit of time before that body as well. So what we want to do today, as I mentioned, is to talk more about the Seawall Coalition, which is a nonpartisan, perhaps just bipartisan, but I think in today's environment, even nonpartisan is the best description, made up of, hopefully, local elected officials, including the City of Williamsburg, state members of the General Assembly, both members of the House and the Senate, and our federal regulators and legislators as well. And the purpose of the coalition is to draw down upon a number of federal funding silos to bring shovel-ready mitigation projects, both structural and non-structural, to not just Virginia's coastal community, but to Virginia and to other states within the nation and to interior states within the nation. So this is not just a coastal situation. We're seeing more and more in the interior of our nation that rivers are flooding. There are crests that are going faster, and it's more frequent that those rivers breach those walls. And we are seeing flooding throughout the country. This is becoming, and I don't think this is a surprise for those of us in Hampton Roads, it is becoming an economic development issue. For us, it's becoming a tourism issue. It's a military and national security issue, and one that we all need to address. And you may wonder, why in the world are you starting more west and not focusing on an eastern section toward the southern part or the other side of Hampton Roads? And I think part of that may have been selfish on both my and Paul's behalf. We both live on the peninsula, and the peninsula is receiving as much extra water during storm events as other parts of the coast, and we wanted our communities to be part of this voice first. and we are reaching out and have been reaching out to our sister cities on the other side of the water, but we really do need to address it here in our neck of the woods as well. So I'll turn some of this over to Colonel Olson, who will walk through the details. He is an engineer. He does know this. This is his niche area, recurrent flooding and sea level rise. He brings a host of projects and respect and credibility on this matter to the table. So I'll let him walk through some of the details, and we'll both stand by for questions and answers afterwards. But again, our goal, our ask, is that the city be able to join our coalition, help use your influence and your ability to press issues forward to policymakers and lend an ear and a hand to what we're trying to do. We don't require any financial funding from the city. It would not be a legally binding obligation, but the influence of having the city of Williamsburg join the many others who have been party to our discussions, we think would carry a great deal of weight as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Colonel Olson at this point.
Thank you, Susan. Mayor Frayling, members of the esteemed council, Marvin, good to see you. Judge, all good. My name is Paul Olson, and thank you for that lengthy introduction. I think my mother would think everything's true on there. I had a lot of experience. I had the honor of being your federal engineer for 4.5 years. And in that capacity, I learned a few lessons. One of them was it takes a group of people to see a problem the same way. So I would like to say this is fresh thinking. I would like to say this is new, that this is exciting, but really it's the same play out of the same playbook that we used 4 years ago to put the Port of Virginia on the map. Back then, you might recall the port was talked about an economic engine for Virginia, good for the region, which is true, but really it's a position with the largest Navy base in the world now and the fastest growing port on the East Coast. Our port is a center of national gravity for power. So when both sides of the aisle agree on something like this, and they shake their heads and they say this is a good thing, that coalition, that team comes together. And what followed was a massive influx of federal funding with more to follow, a dredging of our harbor from 50 feet down to 55 so we can take the largest ships now, calling on the Port of Virginia, and a boost of our economy, which is not just coastal, as Susan pointed out, but to the interior too. So when I was a district commander, port modernization was a priority, but my long-range strategic priority was to have the region plan for and adapt to for our rising seas. So why not get the same coalition, the same type of coalition together? In the Seawall Coalition, we don't question why it's happening. That is a debate for climate scientists. That's a debate for oceanographers. That's a debate for every American to have internally. But what we realize is that the sea is rising. The land is sinking. And it's happening twice at the national average here than it is anywhere else in the nation, with the exception of New Orleans. So you don't have to get out of Dodge. If you're in coastal Virginia, you don't have to run and buy a house in Williamsburg just yet to get on the high ground. But it is happening, and it's something we have to plan for. So the Seawall Coalition is a 501c4 organization that is funded from First Street Foundation, which is a 501c3. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the coalition and what what we're endeavoring to do. Again, if you think about it in terms of the Port of Virginia, we secured 400 times more federal funding by elevating our port to a federal issue, to a federal imperative. This was done through a combination of our military bases, our vibrant Virginia Port Authority, and the over 300 communities in the Virginia Maritime Association that advocated for the port. The fact is, what the VMA did for the port, the Seawall Coalition is trying to do for resilience, to be the national voice, to take our message up to DC and advocate where in my research, I have not found another national level advocacy group who will take on the funding issues that revolve around resilience. I believe we're the first. And it's not that we want to get all the money to Hampton Roads. We don't. There's other areas of the nation. There's other Americans that need help. But what we do want to do is get our fair share to the Commonwealth of Virginia, because we are underserved. So we're here to address a national level issue. We have 3 major tools in the toolbox. Membership has its benefits. We have 3 major tools in the toolbox that are for immediate use. The first tool that's been developed is called Flood IQ. This is a tool that replicates very sea level rise and flooding tools that are out there for sale to the general public, which range from $100 to $500 you can buy to see what your flood risk is. And this makes sense. I'm a home inspector. I give home inspections, free home inspections to disabled veterans. We do radon, we do mold, we do asbestos. Why aren't we doing flood? Now here's a tool to do it on floodiq.com. You plug in your address, you hit enter, and if you live in Virginia or Florida, it will give you your flood risk today and what it will be over the next 50 years. And the best part of it, this is public data. This is data from my colleagues in NOAA, NASA, Corps of Engineers. So for this, Flood IQ is free for all Americans to use. The second big tool is sealevelrise.org. Before we formed this coalition, I wanted to be surrounded by a group of experts, because that's how we do things in the military. I believe that's how a great city like Williamsburg runs. You surround yourselves with experts who give those great reports. If you go on sealevelrise.org, you'll see our experts that are chosen across the nation, but many of them call Williamsburg their home. For example, scientists out of the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and the director for the Virginia Coastal Policy Clinic over at William and Mary, Elizabeth Andrews. These are members of our experts. And it's not just scientists, it's not just engineers, it's real estate experts, it's geologists, it's senior policy officials out of both prior administrations. If you go to sealevelrise.org and you click on the experts, you will see those experts that are available to answer the tough questions for coalition members. And then here's your advocacy arm. Like I said, as Virginia Maritime Association advocates for the port to go deeper, wider, and safer for the big ships, the Seawall Coalition will be your advocacy voice for regional, Commonwealth, and of course up at Capitol Hill. I know that area. I've done 3 tours in the Pentagon, and a little bit of humor as we say the Pentagon only has 2 sides, not 5, inside and outside, and I'm glad I'm on the right side. So I invite you at a separate time to go to these sites, press the icon, and you'll see a short 2-minute video on Flood IQ. It's very well done. The people behind the coalition have got marketing skills, communication skills that are unlike what I've seen in 30 years of federal service. The same thing goes for sealevelrise.org. I invite you to go to this site, see who the local experts are that will be at your service should you have a question. A good example is recently the city of Hampton is struggling with their continuing authorities program. This is pretty much $5 to $10 million of free money for sea level rise and coastal engineering processes through the Corps of Engineers. They have been unsuccessful, so we've linked them up with other localities who've been more successful with CAP projects. That exchange of information is also a great benefit of the coalition. Our other priority area right now is Miami. While their geomorphology is different, their politics are somewhat different, their problems are the same. So this exchange of information is a very strong tool. And then finally, the Seawall Coalition, National Solutions to Sea Level Rise. We're about unlocking those. We have 4 basic areas where we are engaging: elected officials and their city councils, Businesses are huge because we must monetize the problem, and happy to report that our latest member is John Reinhart, who's the president and CEO of the Virginia Port Authority. He realizes that a vibrant port must remain on the coast and our assets need to be protected. Military leaders, having spent 30 years on our nation's cloth, I talk to them often. I'm not asking any uniformed officials to join the coalition because that's usually slightly problematic because of federal rules, but their associate memberships like the Hampton Roads Military Federal Facilities Alliance, the Military Economic Development Alliance Council, the MIDACs, are joining up, and to have their voice for the soldiers, sailors, Marines and family members and airmen and family members is key. And of course, cities and towns like yourself. The four of those puzzle pieces to unlock those national solutions to bring us our fair share of federal funding. There's our mission statement. There's our focus area on the right, again focusing on what Virginia has plenty of, 18 military bases, major ports, and over 125 million Americans on our coasts. That is our caucus. Our platform, number one, invest in smart infrastructure. I'd like to take a moment to say, just because we're called the Seawall Coalition, that does not mean we advocate seawalls. The majority of my coastal protection projects when I was in the Corps of Engineers were sustainable or green protection measures. We have a lot of sand in Hampton Roads. It's a lot cheaper to dump that on the beach every 10 years than to build walls. Using smart plannings for the communities to keep them ahead of the issues. For communities really only have three choices in some areas, like my hometown of Poquoson. We can defend, we can adapt, or we can retreat. So it's really a balance of those three options done in a smart, deliberate fashion that we can help and advise with. And then after a storm, and a storm will happen, we not only build back, but we build back stronger and better. Because a new building built today has different codes than an old building that's built in 250 years ago, and they'll be built back stronger. And of course, being from the military, ensure our installations can deploy 365 days a year to make sure those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and critical civilians can get on and off the bases. Benefits of membership, again, I think I've talked about our strong platform. The second thing is I believe we're the first forum or venue to openly talk about sea level rise, and not like it's a nasty word or a word that it shouldn't be talked about. It's a reality. It's happening. And those who talk about it decisively, deliberately, will be the ones that are at the front of the line for federal fundings. And of course, opportunities and tools that can be used amongst the coalition. I showed you Flood IQ. I showed you the sealevelrise.org. And there are other areas where if you need an advocacy at the Commonwealth or the federal level, we can be that advocate, and we can also share the best practices that come out of your city. So as Susan said, joining, hey, it's simple. Here's the bottom line. What we'd be looking for is the great logo of the city of Williamsburg, and maybe behind that a quote or a commitment that says something in line of, in the day and age of rising waters with all economies linked to our coast, the city of Williamsburg supports the efforts of effective sea level rise planning. That's it. Just to say that, you get us, you get what we're doing, and we're here for you. And we can be there when you call, and we can also pull best practices from you to share with other communities that might have the same problem. Again, we're growing. We're starting in Florida, mainly around the Miami, Coral Gables regions, and we're starting in Virginia too. We're quickly assembling members of the coalition, and again, it's free. This is sort of a national issue, and it's something that, as I endeavor on my second career of public service, it's one I'm proud to be of. So, that's the end of the formal briefing. I believe I have 2 questions already. If you want me to entertain those questions.
Sure,
Yes,
please.
Okay, the questions that we've been encountering thus far has been, one, where are you getting your funding from? So our funders additionally wanted to remain anonymous, and that was problematic. They are good souls. I know them both personally, but they wanted to say, hey, we don't want it to be about us. We don't want our names on it. But the top level funder is a man named Matthew Eby, EBY. He formerly led marketing for the Weather Channel. He is the inventor of Weather Underground, and he is a master of internet marketing. He made more millions than I made by the time I was a second lieutenant in the Army. And now he is a true philanthropist, and he wants to give back. EBY. The next, and he is, I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but I'm going to say it. He's a Democrat. On the other side of the aisle, the next biggest donor is a gentleman named Jay Faison, Faison. He is the CEO of ClearPath. He's a Republican, and he's made his money out of Charlotte, and now he focuses on renewable energy. Those are the two major donors by levels of magnitude. We have other donors that are families, much smaller, that may wish to remain anonymous, but to be abundantly clear, it's on both sides of the political spectrum, all sides of the political spectrum, and these are people that want to get things done. That's where Susan and I get our operational funds from and our various seed money. The second question that we've received is, what's your governance? How's this going to run? Well, when you're forming a coalition, you want to first form the coalition and take on members. Right now in Virginia, we have about 16 significant members. What we're looking at is an association, just like a 501c4, like the Virginia Maritime Association, which is a membership-driven coalition where we get feedback on the Virginia agenda from our members. We're overseen by a board of directors, and that's what we advocate to the General Assembly. For the national level, we will use our Commonwealth experts, which is our senior members, to marry up with the other coalition members nationwide to make sure that we establish a national agenda that benefits all regions of the nation. So just like your traditional 501c4, we'll have the same organization. But I really hesitate of forming all of this governance until I get a good selection of members to hear from. I hope those answer your two questions.
Thank you, Colonel Olson. Come to council for questions, comments.
Just a couple comments and a question. This seems like an awesome effort. You know, I really like the way the initiative came about. It seems very organic and well-intentioned. Who have you been to see on the peninsula on the south side? Who are you going to see next? Regional commissions, et cetera?
Great question. I'd like to allow my Virginia rep to handle that.
I'm more than happy to answer that.
But remember, tell them
Vice
our
Mayor
one
Foster. Yes, the one rule is Paul and I have to have fun doing what we're doing. So this is not only for a wonderful cause, but we're enjoying the time that we're spending throughout Hampton Roads. So we have met with the city of Richmond. You remember that storm a number of years ago by the last name of Gaston, Hurricane Gaston, when it flooded downtown Richmond. They actually responded very quickly and drew down federal funds to build that seawall that now, the floodgate, which is now serving downtown Richmond quite well. And it's really helped to assist in some of the revitalization. We've met with the City of Newport News, City of Hampton, City of Poquoson, York County. We have met with City of Norfolk. We will be meeting with Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, and other points on the other side of the water. We have met with most every single member of the Virginia Flood Commission. We have commitments from Chairman Chris Stolley, Delegate Rob Bloxham, Senator Mamie Locke, Senator Monty Mason, Delegate Jason Miyares, Senator Linwood Lewis, and again, that's pretty much positioned on both sides of the aisle. And we will continue to press that out as we convene in the General Assembly session middle of January. We'll have a captive audience and can get more work done while they are all there in town for 60 days. And we've also met with most members of our federal delegation. Congressman Scott Taylor from Virginia Beach, and he represents the city, has signed on. He also has developed a niche in sea level rise and flooding, and is becoming a national leader and a national spokesperson on this particular issue. Congressman Rob Whitman, Senator Tim Kaine, Senator Mark Warner, we have briefed all of them, and again, we will continue to press out with other members of the Virginia delegation to try to get that wholesale support and for them to be able to create what we hope will be a seawall or a flooding coalition and caucus throughout the District of Columbia and the halls of government so that we can be not just talking about it from a Virginia perspective, but they can have colleagues from across the nation be aware of what's happening to Virginia and help alleviate the risk, mitigate the risk, and strengthen our ability to be an economic driver and a military champion.
And Gordon Helsel, did you get him?
Oh, I apologize. Delegate Helsel, yes, from the city of Poquoson. Sorry about that.
All right, that's it. Barb?
And are these people that have signed on or have just voiced support and accepted the presentation?
Sure.
Our hard sign-ons, and these are very important, at the federal level, Scott Taylor is a hard sign-on. We have got verbal commitments from Senator Kaine and Congressman Whitman, but not a hard sign-on yet. Hard sign-on, as Susan said, from every member of the Joint Subcommittee for Recurrent Flooding. So Delegate Stolley, Mamie Locke, Linwood Lewis, Ron Bloxham, and then on the peninsula too, Gordon Helsel, because we get a lot of flooding in Poquoson. So those are all hard sign-on too. Crossing over to over the water, we just crossed over last week, and we met with Mayor Alexander. He's all for it. We shook hands, but not the sign-on yet, because I think we are going to be assisting him with an issue already. So we're sort of already seeing how the coalition can help him get the word out on something. And as I said earlier, the Virginia Port Authority, which was huge, we haven't engaged the Virginia Maritime Association members. That starts tonight when I, with my Christmas tie, go over to their mixer after this. And Admiral David Architzel from the Military Economic Advisory Council has signed on too. Those are the hard sign-ons thus far.
But no municipalities or cities to date?
No, I not yet. So I respect the process. I respect the advice that Marvin gave us earlier in the day. There is a process, earlier in the month, there's a process to be respected. We gave a lengthy presentation to Bob Crum from HRPDC, and I've been told by several sources that he presented us a couple days ago. Those two questions that the city manager asked me to answer came up, and I will be answering them to all the CAOs officially, but you got the sneak peek. But I would say that when you get the answer over email, that's the official answer, but it'll smell exactly like what I just said.
Okay. And the people that you mentioned as far as your funding source, those were the First Street Foundation, was the...
Yes, First Street, that's the 501c3.
Okay. And as far as federal funds that you hope to obtain, I know that federal funds for certain things seem to be shrinking a little bit, so would these be from DOD, EPA, FEMA, or is there a group out there or an agency out there already that provides for this type of more proactive preventive measures?
This is an excellent question, Councilwoman. And in my experience as the Corps commander, we don't know what we don't know. But up at that level, you see all these opportunities, and you just hit yourself against the wall saying, why don't they go after this Park Service money? Why don't they go after this commerce money? Why don't they go after this European Union money? Yes, that's out there too. You get exposed to all of these wonderful funding sources that are not quite at the interest to the federal engineer, but should be very interested in communities, for communities and cities and municipalities. Norfolk has started to dabble in this field and has seen successes already. Their $125 million HUD grant is a stellar example of tapping into a non-traditional fund. But now at ODU, we're helping them tap into DOT funds. European Union funds, all these other pots out there that I believe as a member of a coalition should be shared with everybody. So the answer is yes, the federal and other non-federal money is out there, but I recognize that when you don't have the staff that many other cities have, that you just can't get at it. And that's where we think we can fill that niche for our region.
Anything else?
No.
Thank you both for coming. It's all very new to me. I mean, I'm familiar with, sea level rising and land shrinking, and only familiar with it. Don't have any answers to how to prevent either of them. I guess I'm curious, what are we doing, from your perspective as a military background, what are we doing from a military perspective on addressing these issues? And how do you complement what's happening in the military? I mean, with all the bases and all the folks that we have here that work for the Department of Defense, you would think that the federal government is kind of a leader in this effort. Or are they not?
Can we order Chinese food? Because this is going to take a while. No, to be very specific, my experience has been that the Department of Defense is very well funded to take on this issue. So the Naval Station, in my personal and professional opinion, isn't going anywhere. Cheatham Annex is not going anywhere. Department of Defense will take care of Department of Defense. The issue that's at play here, it is against the law. The Department of Defense does not have the authority to do anything for sea level rise off base on the other side of the wire. That authority lies with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is a whole nother pot of money. It's called the Civil Works Appropriation, and we're woefully underfunded as a nation, but then doubly so as a region. So yes, there in the future, infrastructure might go one direction or another in the future, but right now, if you go off of past history of our funding, I would be advocating for our fair share of that pot, which mainly is going to areas like New Orleans, New York, New Jersey, and I think there needs to be a caucus and a national discussion to make sure that evens out. But as for our military, that base is not going anywhere. We will defend that base from sea level rise, but the issue is, what about right off the base? How do those sailors get on and off? And one of the early platforms that I plan to take with the permission of the members is to allow the services to use their mission funds to provide to municipalities to do those required civil works projects, infrastructure projects, to get the sailors onto base. If it's so important to their mission, we should be able to tap their mission funds to help their sailors get on the base. That would be one example of a very early platform, if approved by the membership, that the Seawall Coalition is eager to take on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems short-sighted that they would only be concerned about their geographic area and not, to your point about how do you get soldiers on and off the base, and how do you move equipment up and down the peninsula.
They're concerned, but again, they just don't have the authority to do that. It's all, at that level, it's all about congressional authorities and what you cannot do with money. So ours would be a legislative fix to allow them to use their mission funds off base.
Right. Is it safe to assume that they, even though they'll take care of themselves, that they wouldn't venture off to support an initiative like the Seawall Coalition? Again, it behooves them to make sure everything around them's dry as well. I mean, can they get behind you?
I'm sure the city manager has had discussions with his own staff where they think it's one person's money and pot of money and responsible, and it's the other. So again, they would say yes, they support it, but they truly see that as another agency's responsibility, and they don't want to give up their funding. In this day and age of our global war on terror example, they don't want to use that funding to do an infrastructure project, but you can see the point. You do need the sailors to get to the carriers.
And this may be an impossible question to ask or answer, but because I'm sure you two are the best qualified people to head up this type of effort. But are there other efforts out there to do the same thing, going after these pots of money, and or is this
You're looking at it.
Good.
We're the first. Just like the First Nations capital was here, here we are.
Hopefully you won't leave us like the nation's
Well,
capital
you know,
did.
one thing is you guys are already smart. You moved your capital once already to high ground, so
Right.
it's that kind of planning. You're ahead of everybody else.
I don't have any other questions
Thank
at the moment.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation, Susan. It's always great to see you, and Colonel Olson as well for your leadership on this effort. While you were giving your presentation, you mentioned the two resources. I got so eager I had to check out sealevelrise.org, and it's a really well done website. Just some of the facts are astounding. Not outstanding. It's astounding, how it's costing us, $4 billion here in just Hampton Roads to speak to that. And just the fact that the rate of sea level rise has accelerated by 75%, it is definitely a big issue for the whole of Hampton Roads. I feel like it's kind of awkward to say that because I kind of feel out of line based on just, within the city. But in terms of the whole Hampton Roads, I'm aware that sea level rise has been a big issue, and this is an exciting initiative. It's good that we're beginning to have those conversations as well, even from the past governor's race. It's been mentioned in Hampton Roads by both candidates. And it's exciting to see that you're getting support from the port and from some of the top senatorial leaders in the state Senate. I just had a quick question. What is the situation working with the incoming administration, the governor, with Governor Northam? Because I am not as sure about how the process works, but I'm pretty sure the governor's office also coordinates in efforts to tap these federal funding grant opportunities. So are you working in consortium with them to achieve these grants, or is this a completely separate?
Well, Councilman Zhang, to answer the question, yes and yes. You noted that both candidates did include information in their platforms about the importance of sea level rise. Right. And remember that Governor-elect Northam is from the Eastern Shore, which is really sort of the epicenter of communities in the nation that are trying to deal with the effects of sea level rise.
That's right.
So he is beginning to put together his administration. There are likely announcements coming out today on some personnel issues. In fact, one may have already taken place while I was standing here. I've not checked my phone. But we are in the process. Once he has his people locked into their various positions, we will start those outreach efforts. And many of them are already aware of what's going on because they were involved in the prior administration, or they're coming out of organizations that this sort of discussion has already been part of their mantra, and they're able to discuss and understand exactly what is going on. So once these early logistical issues are locked up by the governor-elect and his team, we will begin a more formal outreach effort to them. There is, within each gubernatorial administration, there is generally a congressional liaison, someone who is appointed to be the eyes and ears of the Commonwealth in the halls of Washington. I don't know at this point who that will be, but I can tell you that once that person has been named and approved, we will have those discussions. But I think that speaks more again to the whole notion of a coalition effort. It is going to take people from both sides of the aisle. It's going to take people from all levels of government. It will take businesses, military, federal facilities, NGOs. It's going to be needs to be a loud and very active and dynamic and diverse organizational structure to move this forward. And I have no doubt, while I've not spoken directly to the governor-elect on this particular issue since the election, I have no reason to suspect that he would not be, at least from an advocate of our purpose. I think he would be very much a supporter of our mission and our goals. But we need to let his team get organized and focused on their immediate issues at the moment.
Yeah, it's coming up pretty soon.
It is.
So thank you for that answer. I guess it's just another quick question. And again, I don't serve in that role. Actually, Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor serves in the role. But with the HPDC, the Planning District Commission, I've seen from some of their newsletters that they've touched on topics of sea level rise. I don't know if it's within their purview that they actually do matters of sea level rise in the way that you would do. So I guess just do they, apply for funding for addressing certain infrastructure issues with sea level rise? And I guess how would your efforts complement the PDC and that kind of established regional engine already?
I'm glad you asked that because I forgot to make that point. It's critical. The HRPDC, the efforts of Old Dominion University, the efforts of VIMS, William and Mary, the Commonwealth Center for Recurring Flooding Resilience are all exceptional. They do a really excellent job addressing recurrent flooding and sea level rise at the local and regional level, and at some extent to the state. It's excellent. I would say if you're a sports fan, they win the World Series for single A or double A baseball every season, and they're going to win it again. But what we're not playing is we're not playing in the major leagues, ladies and gentlemen. We are not asking for the larger federal opportunities. We are not setting up those coalitions that are existent already in New Orleans, in New Jersey, and New York, and they get the $18 billion hurricane prevention systems. But no, we're not going to get an $18 billion. Sure. But the Corps of Engineers just published a report, if you saw it last month. It's recommending a $2 billion system to protect a lot of Hampton roads. And without an advocacy group that's educating decision makers at the federal level, that $2 billion will most likely go to a squeaker wheel that sure. might need the grease. So the efforts that we're doing already are exceptional, but we have to pair them up with an equally aggressive federal level.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for your advocacy and your efforts to educating and advocating to the decision makers. Thank you. I have no other further questions.
Thank you. So sea level rise is invariably linked to other issues which come under debate as to whether or not they're legitimate. But we're only talking about sea level rise at this point. That's an objective number. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how sea level rise is measured and how we know it's occurring?
I'll let the engineer answer that question.
She is turning into an incredible engineer, I have to say. I'm a knuckle-dragging engineer, but if I need a answer with panache, I send it to Susan. We have a tide gauge, Mayor. We have several tide gauges in Hampton Roads. One of them, which is by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, has been operated by NOAA for over 100 years right now. It's been collecting data for 100 years. This is empirical data. What that data is displaying is that our sea is rising around Chesapeake Bay by 3 millimeters a year. We also have data from NASA, from satellite data, from USGS, United States Geological Service, that shows us that our land is sinking. Our land is sinking 3 centimeters a year too, subsiding. We also have a problem that back in my home state, and it wasn't my fault, but there used to be a big glacier there, and it melted. And just like you would, and the land in the center of the country is rebounding. And just as you would grab the center of a tablecloth, of a round table, the edges come on in. That's also adding to our problem. And if that's not enough, we have the quadruple whammy, that as our atmosphere warms, the whirlpool, which is the Gulf Stream, starts slowing down because the water gradient isn't as different. So much as your glass of tea, as you stir in the cream and you let it settle, that spiral gets slower and bigger. That's what's happening to our Gulf Stream now, which is pushing more water up against Virginia than anywhere else. That's the quadruple whammy, and that equates to 6 millimeters of sea level rise a year. And for those of you who are not big fans of the metric system, if you have an iPhone and you multiply 6 millimeters by 10, you get 6 centimeters. So this is what it is in 10 years. That is our sea level rise that we're experiencing in Hampton Roads. And Jobs must be brilliant because he made his iPhone 12 centimeters tall, so this is 20 years. Much as one's, a career of a city engineer or something. So this number is real. It's substantial. It's proven empirically. It's what the Corps of Engineers used for their reports for sea level rise mitigations. But the story doesn't stop there, because then science will argue that we're still warming up quicker in our atmosphere, and that 6 centimeters, which has been displayed over the last 100 years, is not going to be representative of the next 100 years. We could be talking about 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise. by the end of by 2060. These are significant numbers. But again, I'm not a climate scientist, Mr. Mayor. I cannot, it's not my background, but I am an engineer, and we would be foolish not to plan for this and then take into account some uncertainty to add to whatever might happen with our sea level rise. So the numbers are there. It's just, do you want the medium risk, the low risk, or the high risk? That's really the question at hand for our coastal communities.
Any other questions? Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Sure.
Thank
You know how to get in touch with us if you have questions. Thank you all.
So come back to council for discussion. Mr. Foster?
I think it's an awesome effort. I'm interested to see how other localities respond to similar presentations. My understanding of the city's sea level rise exposure is that it's minimal. We don't have any structures that are, other than the dock at College Creek, that are in danger. I think it would probably be best if some other localities with higher exposure were the first to sign on. It would kind of be odd for us uplanders to be the first in line. So more than willing to entertain this at a later date. So if we could, by my opinion, that it will be on the January agenda.
After some others have signed on.
Sure.
I would agree with Vice Mayor Foster.
You know, for me, it seems like something that we ought to participate in. You know, I think if there's an effort out there that we can, you know, tangentially participate in to find federal dollars to go towards something like this effort is something we ought to participate in. But as I said earlier, you know, what I don't know about this organization or any other organization is pretty significant. And for me, I would like to maybe have staff look into this a little bit more, maybe have some more conversations, and I can do some more research myself. But it's certainly on the surface, and from what I've heard today, it's something that I think we could eventually get to become a member.
So what, if any, role will the PDC have? Could they be a member? Could they?
My assumption is that the PDC as a separate organization could be a member of the Seawall Coalition. And the Chief Administrative Officer Committee hears items prior to them being set on the agenda of the PDC. There's also a subcommittee that works on sea level rise issues that the CAO committee would likely get feedback from. Carolyn and a lot of other planning directors or engineers or people who work with floodplain issues serve on a regional committee that work towards that. But planning committees tend to not be as much in the advocacy realm on this, but the CAO issue took on the new FEMA regulations recently and advocated for some changes at a national level. So that was an effective means of raising awareness on a particular issue area similar to this. The questions, I haven't talked to my companions on the committee that heard the presentation there, but based on the questions we received, that they weren't too far outliers. It's more just getting the details, much like Councilman Pons said, work with your counterparts and dig in a little bit on the details and cross the T's and dot the I's. But if there's any short-term advocacy issues that come up, having the go-ahead from council to be able to work with the coalition in advance of council considering a resolution would be beneficial.
Yeah, generally, you know, I'd support this initiative. I think they've got a lot of good facts and figures and folks that are involved, including one of our very own from the Coastal Policy Center, which I know, from what I understand, is very active with our federal partners and all. You know, I understand that we're also uplanders from what the Vice Mayor has said, but I think also, you know, at the same time, there has been precedents before where Williamsburg has lent its name, and you know, recently, just in the past year, we decided to join on the Peninsula Airport Commission, which I know is different, but in terms of an economic development argument, there could be one made based on what I've saw very briefly on the website as well. If it's just simply with that, I don't know if that's going to detract our neighboring localities. Maybe I'm just a little green on that. I don't really foresee how Norfolk seeing the city of Williamsburg seal on the coalition will make them gasp in horror and how dare those uplanders join this effort. But I do recognize that. So, I'm generally one way or the other, but I don't really see, and I think there's also value to what Marvin has said too, to gather the input from other localities as well and kind of see how they respond to the presentation. I don't mind that as well, but I can also go forward with supporting this today as well. So, but I defer to the majority of my colleagues. So, thank you.
I don't think there's any doubt that the potential for sea level rise in this region could be catastrophic from a health, safety, and welfare standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And despite the Department of Defense taking care of their own, it could impact security issues. It's also a huge threat to economic development, because if we're in an area where prospective businesses are concerned about the ability for them to safely invest in infrastructure and then potentially have that compromised in the short or not too distant future, that becomes a real reason to look somewhere else to locate your business. And I don't mean in the city of Williamsburg. We're not right now anywhere near as vulnerable as some of our regional counterparts, but we're all part of one big economy. So it's really important that Hampton be successful, Newport News, Norfolk, Pocosin, everybody. So I see real value in supporting the effort, and I also understand and appreciate that it doesn't have to happen today. And I certainly wouldn't want to pressure a colleague to do something today if they'd like some more time to think about it and get some more information, because I would want us all to support it together.
Right.
And not have somebody question, is this really the right thing to do? So
I agree.
I think the prudent move here would be to give a little bit of time. Maybe each of us individually can have some conversations with staff, get some other questions answered, and then come back at a future meeting and address this. There's nothing on the table, so we don't need to table anything. One thing I would suggest, please read, I know you all have read the language of the proposed resolution, but give it another look, careful look, and make sure you're comfortable with everything there. I do have one thing I'd like to point out now, if I can get to the right part. There's one section that talks about, let me get to it. It's the fourth whereas. Can we get rid of the second proactively? Having proactively in there twice in the first four words, and proactively prevent doesn't mean anything to me. That makes sense, Mr.
Yeah,
Collins?
that makes sense.
When
Yes.
it comes back to us.
Legal writing's haunting me now.
Anything else? Okay. Mr. Collins, you'll remind us in the coming month or two about this, and then we can determine when it comes back up?
Definitely. I'll work with the other jurisdictions in the region and with the Seawall Coalition leadership, work with council to customize the draft resolution, work towards a comfort level to join, but support the general initiative and principle. Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Gaston, Colonel Olson, thank you very much for all that you're doing and for being here today. This takes us to city attorney reports.
Nothing today.
Unfinished business. New business. Foster.
All right.
First, appointments to boards and commissions.
Move that effective January 1, 2018, City Council reappoint Don Kohler to the ARB for a 4-year term that will expire on December 31st, 2021. Richard Baker and Scott Spence to the Board of Building Code Appeals for 5-year terms that will expire on December 31st, 2022. And Lane Macbeth and Jeff Clee to the Planning Commission for 4-year terms that will expire on December 31st, 2021. And that City Council appoint James Boswell to the Planning Commission for a 4-year term that will expire on December 31st, 2021.
Second.
Ms. Scott.
Mr. Zane?
Aye.
Mr. Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Next item is appointment of City Council Clerk.
Pursuant to Section 16 of the Charter of the City of Williamsburg, I move that Andrew Trivett be appointed City Clerk of the City Council effective January 1, 2018.
Second.
As much as I support this, it makes me sad to think that this is potentially saying goodbye to Ms. Scott's help on council. I know you've tried to retire multiple times. We have stopped that each and every one, but this just seems so much more final.
Yes, sir, it is.
So would you, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Zane.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster.
Aye.
And Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Anything else, Mr. Foster?
Yes, sir.
Takes us to open forum. Anybody who'd like to address council today, please come forward, state your name and address. Good afternoon, Mr. Lane.
Lane, 248 Yorkshire Drive. I had no intention of speaking today, but I think you just missed a great opportunity on the Seawall Coalition to take a leadership role. There's absolutely no downside. Take a leadership role. Why wait for somebody else to be on board and say, okay, well, we'll join too? I would put it the other way. I would make sure you check, make sure there aren't a couple skeletons in a closet back there that they haven't talked about. But once you are fairly confident of that, why wait?
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Anybody else? Seeing no one, close the open forum. Anything for closed session?
Not today.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
For the last time, Ms. Scott.
Mr. Zane.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Foster.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
We're adjourned.